Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narada Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So, the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. If this is your very first episode, you're welcome to check out the trailer, Episode 0 Rockstar. But to give you a brief overview, we'll be talking about a story from Indian mythology during each episode. This will be followed by a Character of the Week segment, though I might change the format in the future. As far as possible, I'll keep the episodes standalone, so you don't have to listen to them in any particular order. That's going to be a bit hard though, when we get to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but I'll try my best. Everything else that I'll be covering, including the Akbar Birbal stories, the Panchatantra, the Jatak tales, Vikram Betal, Tenali Raman, and regional folk tales, are much better suited to the standalone format. Today's episode is about an okami fish that later becomes a giant unicorn fish. An okami, if you recall your Harry Potter, is a creature that can grow to fill all available space. If you have seen the Fantastic Beasts movies, you'll have seen one. The character of the week is either a man with wings and a beak or just a big bird. And when I say big bird, I don't mean the Sesame Street variety. I mean the Sinbad the Sailor variety. The kind that kills giant snakes. So let's dive right in. What happens to a king in retirement? Manu had been a good king. He had ruled well, and presumably been merciful on more than one occasion, because he was called Manu the Merciful. Now that his son was all grown up, Manu handed over the reins of the kingdom and went to the top of the Malay mountain. The name should not be confused with the Himalaya mountain range in northern India. The Malay mountain was in the south and was part of a much smaller range. Manu went to the top of that mountain to pray to the gods and to do yoga, which was as much a mental and spiritual exercise as a physical one. After 1,000,000 years of praying, seriously, I'm not joking, it was 1,000,000 years, Brahma, the creator, appeared before Manu. Brahma is one of the Holy Trinity, the others being Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Also, Brahma is my dad. Brahma was pleased with Manu's devotion and asked him what he wanted. Manu had only one teeny tiny wish. It's almost nothing, he said. May I please just have the power to save all of the universe when the apocalyptic floods arrive? Brahma paused a long time and finally said, First, it's pretty weird that you said when and not if. And secondly, you knew that the apocalypse is a flood and not something else, like a nuclear war. And third, of course you can have the power to save all of the universe when the apocalypse arrives. As we go through more episodes, you'll see much more of this. Brahma is a god who's particularly easy to please. He goes about scattering wishes to any and all who pray to him. Giving someone the power to save the universe? That's just a regular day in the office for him. Happy with himself, Manu went back to a little hermitage. Life went on until one day he scooped up some water from a pond nearby before offering it in prayer to his dearly departed relatives. Because that was a thing you did every time you bathed, apparently. Normally, dearly departed relatives is supposed to mean ancestors. But seeing as Manu lived more than 1 million years, it probably meant several thousand generations of his descendants as well. Anyway, as Manu scooped up the water, he saw something in it. It was a tiny fish. The fish was restless and it had beautiful eyes. Because the eyes are the first thing you'd notice on a fish, right? Manu, the merciful, out of compassion, put the fish in a jar. It's not clear why he didn't simply let the fish go. Maybe the pond was known to have bigger fish that would be mean to this little fish. Whatever his reasons, Manu took the fish home with him. Within a day and a night, the fish had grown. It was 16 fingers in length and was quite uncomfortable in the jar. It asked Manu to help. This is the first mention of it being a talking fish. But somehow, Manu was not surprised. He transferred the fish to a bucket. But again, within a day, it had grown and the bucket was too small for it. Manu, by now, should have seriously considered taking his fish to a vet. Instead, he simply transferred the fish to a well. Another day and night, and the fish had again grown too big. Manu moved it to a pond. But the fish quickly grew to be 8 miles in length. And the pond was insufficient again. The fish again asked Manu for help. The same thing happened with the river Ganga, or the Ganges, until finally Manu put the fish in the ocean. But seriously, people, don't try this at home. If you put a freshwater fish in salt water, it will probably die. It isn't clear how Manu transferred the fish from the well to the pond, or from the pond to the river, or from the river to the ocean. Moving a beached whale a few dozen feet is hard enough for us today. But Manu seems to have transported an 8-mile-long fish so effortlessly that it wasn't even worth mentioning. But Manu's fish was no ordinary fish, in case it isn't already clear to everyone by now. It thrived in the ocean and grew in size right in front of Manu's eyes, almost filling up the entire ocean. Manu finally seems to have caught on to the fact that his fish was no ordinary one. He was awestruck and he said, "You must be Vishnu. Who else could have the power to turn into such a big creature?" The fish replied, "Bingo! On your first try. I am Vishnu. And this is just the first of my many avatars. You can call me Matsya. You were right about the apocalypse, or as we gods like to call it, the reset button. In a century, there will soon be a great flood. We gods have made this rescue boat. He tossed the keys over to Manu and said, "You are going to be its captain." In the boat, the gods have placed the four Vedas, which are the religious texts that underpin most of the Hindu religion. Matsya continued his instructions to Manu. If the winds are too strong, tie the boat to my horn. This is the first mention of a horn on Matsya, and it's called the horn, not a horn, making Matsya a unicorn fish. Manu, who seemed remarkably prescient when talking to Brahma, was now completely the opposite. He was bursting with questions. Apocalyptic floods? When? How can I save everything? When will I see you again? Matsya said that from now there will be no rain for 100 years. There will be famine all over the world. All the evil people will be scorched to death by the rays of the sun, which will suddenly turn 7 times as powerful. There will be fire shooting out of mouths in the ground, which is a very reasonable way to describe lava from a volcano. From amongst all of these fires, there will emerge 7 clouds, and it will rain until all the seas are united. The whole earth will be one giant sea. When that happens, Manu, take this boat and this rope and fasten it to my horn. Everything will be destroyed, except for you, me, the Vedas, the Puranas, the sun, the moon, a wise man named Markandeya, the river Narmada. Those are the only things that will be preserved. Manu said, I don't understand. When the whole earth is a mass of water, what does it mean for the river Narmada to be preserved? Matsya replied, why don't we leave it ambiguous? So in the future, podcast listeners can try to figure that one out for themselves. I don't know what a podcast listener is, said Manu, but I'm okay with that. Manu was already 1,000,000 years old, so what was another century to him? He continued practicing yoga, and that probably helped him through the famine, the scorching sun, and the volcanic eruptions and the acid rain that followed. When the seas started rising, Matsya appeared before him, along with the king of serpents, Seshnag, a name that means ultimate snake. The king collected all the remaining living beings and put them on the boat and fastened it to Matsya's horn, using Seshnag as the rope. This was followed by a really long Q&A session between Manu and Matsya. Many of the answers deserve an episode of their own. Some of the stories are about the creation of the universe, why Brahma has 4 heads, and so on. We'll cover some of those in later episodes. To cut back to the story, Matsya safely steered the boat to the top of a mountain, which, if you think about it, does not contradict the earlier remark about the seas being united. But it does contradict him saying that the entire earth will be just one big ocean. I guess he did not expect me to split hair over this. So, anyway, Manu landed at the top of the Himalayas. The floods then slowly receded. Manu offered several prayers, and then, as a response, from the water there emerged a woman. Not quite like some women from the James Bond movies who also emerged from the ocean, but Manu and the lady did end up repopulating the entire earth. That's all I have for now. A few notes from the story. This is the first of Vishnu's avatars, or forms. Conventional wisdom has it that Vishnu has 10 avatars available to him, of which he has used up 9 so far. But there are many more avatars in actual fact. We'll eventually cover them all. There are some parallels with the story of Noah's Ark, but this is not surprising because many cultures across Asia, Europe, and America have a great flood myth as well. The mountain that Manu landed his boat on was called Naubandhana, which literally means something tied to a boat. The text that the story is derived from is a huge book of about 14,000 verses called the Matsya Purana, and we have just barely scratched the surface here. And yes, the Matsya Purana is one of the texts that Manu saves during the flood. How's that for a paradox? There are a few variations of what the Matsya avatar is supposed to have looked like. I've linked some pictures of sculptures and paintings on my site, sfipodcast.com, if you want to have a look. Having lived for several thousands of years, it's natural for my memory to be imperfect at times. So, if you see any errors in my podcast, please point them out to me. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave a comment or a review on the site, sfipodcast.com. The site is also linked in the show notes. Or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified of latest episodes. I'd like to thank my family and friends. There are far too many to call out individually. Everyone has shown incredible support ever since I announced that I'd be doing this podcast. The character this week is Garuda. Garuda is a god who's also a bird of prey. He's either shown as a man with wings and a bird's beak, or just a giant bird. He is Vishnu's vehicle, except when Vishnu is busy being a unicorn fish. Garuda is incredibly powerful, and simply flapping his wings hard enough can stop the earth from spinning, or stop the skies from spinning, as the ancients thought of it. Garuda loves to eat snakes. I mean, who wouldn't if they were a giant bird? There are many symbols of Garuda, not just in India, but in many South Asian countries, including Indonesia and Cambodia. Garuda appears in one of the Night at the Museum movies, and also in the first Tomb Raider movie. I am going to do an episode on Garuda later in the podcast. Next week, we'll be talking about Tenali Raman, a court jester who humiliates his king at every opportunity, is also very cruel to animals, and yet somehow makes a lot of money doing this. The character next week is a bear who could have easily leapt across an ocean if his doctor had not forbidden it. I'll see you next week.